Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's Matt Coleman, your host from Magnify World. As you know, over the coming weeks, we are previewing very special people in the entertainment business. And one of the most interesting finds that we're talking to today is Jeff Gomez from New York. He's the CEO of Starlight Runner Entertainment. He's a transmedia producer who's worked with many of the world's largest franchises in the movie business, from Pirates of the Caribbean, Spider-Man, and many more. Welcome, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. So I know we had a chat before about how you became a transmedia producer, and maybe you should explain what that is first, but we'd love to hear more about also your comic career and how that moved into where you are today.
Well, sure, Matt. A transmedia producer is a kind of producer. Producers are the people who kind of tie everything together to oversee the assembly and production of a movie or a video game or anything that is kind of audiovisual. And my job is to do that, except not on one single media platform, but to oversee the implementation of a story world across multiple media platforms. A transmedia producer has a certain kind of expertise in story, so they understand how a story is told and what narrative is all about, but also has a sense of what the production processes are across various different media, so that they could kind of strategize how the story will be told across these different platforms and how they'll kind of interlace and interact with one another. You might say that Kevin Feige, the Walt Disney Company, is one of the most renowned transmedia producers, because he has to envision how the Marvel Cinematic Universe will work across feature films, across streaming on Disney Plus, Netflix, and what have you, across network television, and also, of course, across an array of different other kinds of media, including video games and comic books.
So tell us, we were talking also earlier about the Producers Guild of America has put a stamp on transmedia production itself. How does that work?
That's so amazing to me, because I joined the Producers Guild as an interactive producer. I started out in video games, and I just started talking about what it is that I do. And so many people were fascinated with it at the Producers Guild. They said, well, how do you do what you do? And it seems to be making money, because it's pleasing to the fans to get a kind of coordinated story world that has consistency and continuity and integrity. How do you do it? And I started teaching it within the Producers Guild, both in the New York chapter and the Los Angeles chapter. And then one day they said, listen, that is specific enough for us to signify what you do, because other people want to do it. Can you help us to kind of define what a transmedia producer does so that we can accredit it in the Producers Guild of America? I worked with a colleague of mine named Caitlin Burns, and together we kind of hammered out a set of rules that could be understood and implemented specifically by the Producers Guild of America. And so the Transmedia Producer Credit was born.
Fantastic. So look, let's take us back to your comic days. And I know early on in your childhood, you were a big fan of comics, but then you actually did some real life work. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I was born and raised on the Lower East Side of New York City, and that was in the 1960s. It wasn't so great then. Kind of reminds me of the way it is right now. Never mind. And so my escape was fantasy and science fiction, animation, monster movies, and comic books. And I was really fascinated by the integrity of comic books. In other words, the way that comic book universes like Marvel and DC operated in terms of the continuity in between the different titles. So that was one of the ways that I started thinking about narrative and about story worlds. And it so happened that while kind of out of work in the early 90s, after doing some role-playing game work, I stumbled into a Valiant Comics and started writing and editing comic books for the Valiant comic book company.
Fantastic. And that did that lead to any like games or movies and what were you doing?
Yeah. Wow. What was fascinating about Valiant was that at the time that I joined, a video game company called Acclaim Entertainment was about to purchase the comic book company. Acclaim used to do a kind of Marvel superhero video games, kind of early, crude sort of fighting games and things like that. And because I knew about games, because of my background in adventure games, tabletop gaming, I said, let me have a crack at helping to bridge the comic books to the video games. I love the idea of media mix, the notion that there could be continuity between two pieces of content, even though they were on separate media platforms. I hated when you repeated the story, the same damn story over and over again. I liked them to be complementary, the way that the Japanese entertainment industry developed these kind of media mix properties. And Valiant Comics said, listen, as long as we get some video games out of this, I don't care what you do. Just go ahead and get the job done. And so from the comic books, I developed these new superhero video games, which took the best of the continuity from the comics and added something new. And then there was something brand new called the web. And I asked my bosses whether we could put up websites that contain the background information, the lore of the video game, because I couldn't fit everything into the game at that 64-bit Nintendo video games, couldn't fit the giant story I had in mind. So I said, can we put that backstory on the web? And they said, as long as it doesn't cost anything. Sure. So I got interns to help me set it up. So now we had a comic book, a video game, and a website that were acting in tandem, telling a story in concert. And the fans just went wild. In fact, the servers crashed at Acclaim Entertainment because so many fans were coming to look at that backstory, that lore. And that was kind of the first transmedia project that I was involved with.
Wow, sounds exciting. And tell us more about some of your, well, I'm not sure when Halo actually came out, the Microsoft project that you worked on. How did you get involved in that, and what is the experience like?
It's funny. Strangely, it's through the Producers Guild. And if you have listeners who are interested in careers in entertainment or getting into transmedia and so forth, follow these simple instructions. Find an organization like the Producers Guild and ask to write a column for them and so forth. It was an article that I wrote through the Producers Guild called Madonna and Master Chief Are Leaving Hundreds of Millions of Dollars on the Table. and it was an essay about how celebrities and video game properties both ought to leverage transmedia storytelling to maximize their revenue, to create presences for themselves that are complementary across multiple media platforms so that there are access points for fans to learn more and become more deeply engaged with the intellectual property. Well, Madonna didn't call me, but Microsoft did, and they said, "Hey, this is interesting. Can you come to 343 Studios to the Microsoft video game people and talk about the potential of transmedia for our intellectual properties?" And I did, and that led to an engagement, a massive engagement with Halo.
Fantastic. And Tell us more about, the transmedia experiences that you were, working on the game side.
Well, on video games, the beauty there is that in the first place, you're trying to take up many hours of content with your game. So the developers of video games actually have to consider the world, to consider a vast kind of fictional universe that is navigable by the player, right? If I'm a video game player, I want to feel free enough to walk around, to explore, to have many encounters, and to go through a kind of epic narrative where there might be dozens of characters, all kinds of antagonists, gadgets, gizmos, vehicles. I need to work out a kind of cosmology for my game, right? I need to understand how magic or super science works in the games so that there's a consistency and so that they follow certain rules that my programmers can put into the game. Well, that's fantastic. As a transmedia producer, I can absorb all of that. It helps to be a super nerd, but I absorb all of that and go, wow, this is fantastic. You're doing a few things, guys, because I talk to the game developers and the executives involved in the game franchise. I say, listen, you're killing off all of your characters. In video games, that's something you do, right? The hero needs to survive, but not necessarily anyone else, right? Well, that's fine for a game, but it makes it difficult for us to manifest the intellectual property as a movie or TV series or comic book. Everyone's dead. So what we do is, in our analysis of the game narrative, we advise people on what to do to make the property, the world, more robust, more able to sustain itself in all kinds of different media across many, many years. And then we creatively join forces with our client to do that, to kind of develop creative fixes that can allow for that. You know what that winds up doing? It makes better video games. And so gaming in general has improved because of these kinds of techniques. Then, because the client, the game company, is not that familiar with the way that Hollywood works or the way that comic books are published, we assist them in understanding those processes and in helping to prepare the intellectual property for those different media.
Fantastic. Look, let me pick another project and put you on the spot. The Pirates of the Caribbean. Was there a combination with the Disney park ride that, because I can see that franchise is just everywhere, right? In every form, from merchandising, movies, and, theme parks to whatever, right? Do you bundle concepts together for that particular project, and how does all that sort of come about?
It's a truly fascinating case study because you're right about all of that. We arrived toward the end of the Michael Eisner regime, just as Bob Iger was preparing to take control of the company. What various executives at Disney's headquarters, in Glendale, what they were realizing about Pirates of the Caribbean was that the first movie was tremendously successful in an unexpected way. Nobody realized how big that first movie was going to be. So, of course, Eisner greenlit a second and third feature film. It was a massive investment. These were going to be very, very big pictures. But what Oren Aviv, the chief creative officer of Disney, was starting to realize was that franchise, the Pirates of the Caribbean brand, was not particularly lucrative across different media, across the Disney categories, the various things that Disney was doing with its other intellectual properties. He wanted to understand why. What was the problem? How come people didn't quite get Pirates of the Caribbean? And how can we prepare to do much, much better when the second or third movies come out. If they did this right, you could have a transmedia franchise, a blockbuster across multiple media platforms, which vastly increases revenue and engages people, not just in the near future, but for years and years and years, right? So Pirates of the Caribbean, the goal is for that to become an evergreen brand. So our job was to kind of crack it. What is Pirates of the Caribbean? Why was it so popular? Who's Jack Sparrow? We loved Johnny Depp at the time, but we didn't really understand the character very well. And so he was being misinterpreted by different creators across different divisions of the company. So our job was to kind of crack it and understand more deeply what the nature of this story world was, what its deeper mythology is, the themes and messages of the Pirates of the Caribbean brand, and where this is going. How can the mythology work across different media so that we could go in and assist the various people across these different divisions with product development. So that's a process that my company engages in. We call it the action drive system. It's just a fancy name for the narratology that we apply, the study of story, to a franchise universe. Not a script, not a treatment, but an entire story world. Okay?
And what are some of the recommendations you make? Is it, obviously creative, but on the financial side, you find pockets of revenues that have been not exploited, I assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How can we get into those sort of details in the conversation without letting the cat out of the bag?
No. A lot of this is kind of public record. The analysis, in the case of Disney and Pirates of the Caribbean, there was no toy line. There was no a product for young children for Pirates of the Caribbean at the time that we arrived. In fact, Pirates was kind of scary. How do you get a young child involved in a franchise that's so scary? Parents might be hesitant. So one recommendation that we made was, Disney does well with children's books, with chapter books and things like that. Business was booming. Let's create some young Jack Sparrow books, chapter books for young people so that they can enjoy them. They recognize the brand, even though they're not quite allowed to watch the movies yet. So this is a kind of gimme. Let me read this book at least. And so they become kind of, let's say, indoctrinated into the Pirates universe through the young Jack Sparrow novels. And perhaps by the time they're done with them, they'd be apt to go watch the movie with their parents, right? Same with the theme park ride. The complaint about the ride at the time of in between the first and second movie was, where's Jack Sparrow? Where are the characters that we love from the movies in the ride? We were teamed with Imagineering, the people who handled the construction of the rides, and made recommendations to them about how to integrate those characters without kind of disrupting and changing too much of a classic experience in that ride. And the result was a new narrative that tied into the official canon, the continuity of Pirates of the Caribbean. So these projects are as much about pleasing the fans and involving them as it is about increasing revenues and generating new products.
Excellent. And what about a major franchise that's been running for I don't know how many years, Sony's Spider-Man? There seems to be a new Spider-Man every. Is that part of the plot? Is something new like a Batman coming out every 3 years or 4 years? Or these franchises do keep on living, and not going away. You're talking decades, right?
Absolutely.
What's your recommendations, and how do they actually do this? Whether it's animation, that is going through the roof for animated movies, like the Frozen franchise has been enormously successful.
Sure.
They're only up to number 2. I assume they've got something in the works to keep that going, since number 2 was bigger than number 1 on the box office revenues, I believe. But how do you work with these long-term franchises, and actually how do you create them when they're not a Spider-Man?
Oh boy, those are a couple of whoppers of a question.
Yeah, I know.
Well, with animation, fortunately, your characters don't have to age as rapidly as actual actors do. So we can have Elsa in Frozen for many, many years to come, whereas the young man who's playing Spider-Man right now ultimately will have to age out of the role. With regard to a project like Spider-Man, we get called in, and here's the one of the things that as a young person baffled me, that I now get to kind of question with truth to power. You are a major movie studio. You own a franchise that is worth billions of dollars. Why would you allow some third-party freelancer to come in and take a wild guess at what to do with your multi-billion-dollar property? No other company in any other business would even conceive of doing that. And that's something that Disney discovered with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's have our franchise visionary sit in-house. He understands, Kevin Feige fundamentally understands what makes Marvel work, what makes a Marvel character a Marvel character. There are other people who've run studios or franchises who didn't understand the intellectual property nearly as much, and simply called upon the hottest director or the hot screenwriters to give us their take on the character. And sometimes that was wonderful. We got The Dark Knight out of that, which is a masterpiece of a movie. But sometimes it's not so cool, and a whole story universe can collapse because the filmmakers didn't understand what made those characters so powerful and resonant. Okay, so our job is to go in on a project like Spider-Man and take that character apart and show Amy Pascal, who was the co-chair of Sony at the time, exactly what made Spider-Man tick. Here's the fundamental nature of this character. Here's why this character transcends decades and decades and still is amongst the most popular characters in the world. We start there and then expand out to the entire universe of that character, so that Amy has a tool set that she can hand to filmmakers and writers and anyone involved with Spider-Man and say, listen, this is the basis. Knock yourself out with creative, but if you break too many of these rules, it's not Spider-Man anymore.
Sure. Yeah, no, great advice. Thanks for sharing that story. And the other question I had going back a few minutes ago as well, just wanted to circle back, is if someone handed you, 50 animated characters and it was a new project, I mean, how do you look at creating a powerhouse of a franchise from the start? I mean, what are the steps?
Oh, that's the whole...
It's a long answer, but if you can try and condense some simple steps for us, would love to hear your views.
Absolutely. We've handled this sort of thing before, and it's always a great fun because it employs a little more creativity, a little more a thought power on the part of my team at Starlight Runner. But essentially, when we look at a new intellectual property, the first thing that we go to is what does this mean? What change do you want to see in the world as a result of the telling of this story? And that sounds kind of pie in the sky, but it is important because if you want a blockbuster franchise, you're going to spread this story across the entire planet. And the reason why someone in the Middle East or Africa or Asia all will respond to the same story in a way that surprises and delights them is because there are fundamental elements to storytelling that are resonant with every human being. Okay, and one of those is aspiration, desire. What does this want? What do these characters want? And what is the system of wisdom that is going to be the path taken to getting what these characters want or fixing the problem, the systemic problem that they're facing right now? And what's funny is because these things are written sometimes intuitively, they don't have the answer. The people that we're talking to are like, they give a pat kind of standard answer. Love is the answer, that sort of thing. And we go, okay, no. Let's break it down and let's specify it, okay? Once you have that foundational essence, that foundational narrative, it becomes much easier to understand the role that each character plays, and how the narrative can unfold across time and space. And so it's almost like a fractal kind of development. We're not thinking linearly. We're thinking about a universe with a past, present, and a future. And those are the story worlds, if you think about it, that last and that resonate for years and years to come.
Good advice. Thanks for taking us through that. Now, there's all sorts of new production techniques that we've been talking about earlier on with virtual production. The Mandalorian seems to have the biggest press, and I notice Westworld is using virtual production as well, and many others. Even the VMAs on the weekend used virtual production for live TV with no audience. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on where the movie industry is going with the COVID issue that we face.
Yeah, listen, I've been heavily impacted by the pandemic. I live in Manhattan, in Chelsea, Manhattan. I saw firsthand the devastation that COVID-19 wrought, and there are a lot of things to consider and address that are far more vital than virtual production. But I had to make a living, and virtual production became an aspect of what it is that I did. Starlight Runner teamed up with Elevate Pictures, a company operating out of Columbus, Ohio, and yet they're able to do these virtual productions across the entire continent. So I took a crash course, and of course, as a fan of Westworld and The Mandalorian, I studied intensely what my colleagues were doing in that aspect of production. So I find it absolutely fascinating, and not so much because it's less expensive or because it's faster or because you can integrate video game engines, which of course I know and love, into the production process. What I love about virtual production is that there are now ways to make what you're seeing on screen seem even more real and more immersive. And the actors in virtual productions, because of things like projection, the LED screens and so forth, they're seeing what we're seeing, and the light projected by those things is being projected onto them, which allows for something that no amount of Photoshop or After Effects work can do.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing the virtual environments that they can shoot in real time. Potentially, as you're right, can save a lot of money. There's less construction of sets, less staffing, of course, on site, particularly with what's going on. I believe yesterday I was told someone had contracted COVID-19 on a Hollywood set, and that a lot of everything has been shut down again. I don't have the latest status on that, but That's what I was told last night. But virtual production is a good alternative to the traditional method of filmmaking for sure. Let's talk more around the new blockbusters that are coming out, like the Avatar series. I mean, very successful, of course, we know. James Cameron is shooting offshore, potentially filming, I would imagine, the next 3 series in one go. But what do you know about where it came from and where it is today, and what was your association?
I worked on Avatar. I was a transmedia producer for the first Avatar movie, the apex, one of the top moments of my career. And to be involved with this kind of pioneering effort in virtual production, it's unmatchable. The approach taken was crude, still with the little balls on people's faces and bodies. When you looked at the monitors, you saw something that looked like an early '90s video game. In terms of what the resolution was, and yet I'll never forget being standing in the middle of the Battle of Home Tree sequence, standing next to James Cameron, who had a camera on his shoulder, and because we didn't have those little balls on us, we weren't being picked up by the sensors, and watching the battle going on all around us, including Sigourney Weaver hurling herself over obstacles and things like that. It was just magnificent. And it was in an aircraft hangar in Playa Vista, California. So it was the beginning, I feel, of the approach that's being taken now by many productions, and even the approach that Starlight Runner is taking in small scale virtual production, where we're helping retail franchises and charities to create events that can be streamed to fundraise or offer product and so forth in fun, delightful, and highly engaging ways.
Fantastic, great story. Obviously, we're looking forward to seeing what the new series is like over the next probably 5 or 6 years, right? So do you believe that they'll be filming everything like the next series at the same time? When I say at the same time, I mean obviously in different story formats, but since they've got everything set up in virtual production, they can quickly change an environment for something else. I don't know whether that's what's going on. I'm sure it's undercover at the moment, like most movie sets are, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Sure. The fascinating thing about James Cameron and his team is that Jim has everything in his head. He is one of the very, very few supra geniuses that I've ever worked with, who understands everything about everything, and understands even in a non-linear fashion how he's going to shoot 2 movies at the same time, down to the tiniest detail. So that's what's happening. At least 2 films are being shot in an integrated transmedia fashion. Jim is working with Weta Workshop and Weta Digital, Peter Jackson's company in New Zealand, and they actually have an integrated transmedia production system. That's what they call it. And that system tracks every aspect of production across every media platform that's being used, but it also is tracking the construction of the coffee table book or any other a kind of product that Weta is directly involved in assembling for the multi-platform rollout of the franchise. A genuinely fascinating process, and one that obviously we advocate and participated in.
Fantastic. And look, I know we're wrapping up in a minute, but leave us some thoughts on where you think the future of transmedia or the film business is going. I mean, how are you excited about smart glasses and the use of that in the future? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I think that we've got a little ways to go before VR and augmented reality are common. I think that right now we're still a little unwieldy with regard to the equipment, but also with regard to how human perception intakes entirely virtual environments. The way that this is going to be fixed, I believe, is through technology that more carefully and precisely tracks eye movement and the way that eyes interact with light. This technology is in development. It's happening. It's going to be used to make video game athletes even better at their sport. But it's going to make being able to sit within these virtual environments and wear that equipment less nauseating. With regard to transmedia, frankly, I'm a little bit puzzled because there are studios that are doing a transmedia in an exceptional way. Again, with many of the techniques that were pioneered by Starlight Runner, having a fundamental understanding and having an ownership over the mythology franchise story world. And then there are other studios that are saying, you know what, we're going to follow the auteurist edict, and whatever director wants to come and interpret the property, we'll let them go. And by the way, we're in a hurry, so please get it done as quickly as possible. and that's hit and miss. Look, there are some great movies that have come out of that sort of thing, and some not so great. But the world does not cohere, and so it's much more difficult to merchandise or generate toys or things like that from that kind of thing. And you need to do that if you're carrying a multi-billion-dollar blockbuster property. So I'm hoping that more people kind of buckle down and understand and discipline themselves with regard to taking ownership of their IP.
Fantastic. Thanks for those thoughts, Jeff. It's been, really wonderful to get your insights into the world of entertainment and the transmedia producer role that your company takes. Just to end here, could you just give the viewers a shout out on where they can find you on LinkedIn and also the company?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Your questions were terrific, and I want to reiterate that what I do is a dream come true. I've come from humble beginnings, and to be able to work with these incredible people in Hollywood and around the world. I'm working on Ultraman right now. The Marvel comic just came out. Expanding that universe into Hollywood and popular culture here in North America. Super fun. It's just a delight, a true dream come true. If you're interested in what I do and or talking to me, or even getting a little coaching, I do coaching sometimes, education and so forth. Feel free to reach out to me on Facebook. It's Facebook/transmedia. On Twitter, it's @Jeff_Gomez. And just look up Jeff Gomez on LinkedIn and you'll find me right away. and feel free to email me or to contact me, and we'll email and so forth. Do not pitch me your gigantic 10 gigabyte story world. I'm not, my agents don't want me to look at people's intellectual property.
Oh, Jeff, look, wonderful to speak to you today again. And thanks very much for your time. And we'll look forward to catching up. And we did talk about doing a part 2 to this conversation. There's lots more to talk about. So stay tuned and let's organize another time.
Matt Coleman, this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.